Thank you, Kira. Just one quick note. First of all, I'm not a professor, but yet, maybe. And the second thing is that I've changed my title, so it's slightly different. I'm not a lesbian feminist, but forms of lesbian disavowal in contemporary Italian culture. And I'm going to be making, I think, a lot of links back to the documentary we've just seen and the discussion that's just happened. Recent scholarship has discussed how, in a post-feminist age, explicit feminist declarations have fallen out of favour, as feminist principles have been mainstreamed and feminism seems to have had its day. An ambivalent relationship to the feminist past has been identified amongst younger generations of women, crystallising sentences that begin, "I'm not a feminist, but non sono femminista, ma," which then go on to claim rights and freedoms that resonate clearly with feminist goals and objectives. Statements like this are charged with multiple contradictory connotations, with what Angela McRobbie has identified as an entanglement of feminist and anti-feminist ideas. One effect of this entanglement is to disassociate the speaker, I'm not sure. To disassociate the speaker from the stigmatised spectre of second-wave feminism that is perceived as, quote, going too far. Rosalind Gill has underlined the importance of analysing this melding of feminist and anti-feminist perspectives in relationship to neoliberalist individualism. That is, the replacement of the social-political subject with the entrepreneurial, self-regulating, neoliberal individual, exemplified in the highly mediatised figure of the apparently freely choosing, self-reinventing subject of post-feminism. Scholars have questioned whether this subject really can make a free choice, and the extent to which the mainstreaming of feminist ideas dilutes their political punch, leaving them ineffectively complicit with dominant discourses. This paper today takes the entangled instrumentalisation and disavowal of feminism as a starting point and reflects on what happens when the term lesbian is explicitly evidenced in the type of sentence I've just mentioned. And here are a few examples. I'm not a lesbian, although I'd like to identify with one if I wasn't afraid of the consequences. I'm not a lesbian because I'm not like the stereotype of man-hating, raving separatist, but I like girls. I'm not a lesbian, I just sleep with women. I'll take advantage of the relative advances in sexual freedoms, but I won't support political battles or challenge normativity. I'm not a lesbian, I'm queer, and I support LGBT rights. These are just a few different types of disavowals of lesbianism that we might consider. What I want to ask today is what kinds of disavowal can these statements be seen to connote, and what consequences do they entail? We've just seen some striking examples of lesbian disavowal in the documentary Diversamente Etero. The phenomenon of insomnia crystallises some key tensions and problems surrounding lesbian disavowal. Taking that as the first example, to which I'll add others, I want to suggest three things. That the form of lesbian disavowal evidenced in relation to Sara and Veronica is not an isolated phenomenon, it's diffuse. Second, it's a form of disavowal that's produced within, even demanded by, the broad context of Berlusconismo. And third, to which I come in my conclusion, rather than a post-lesbismo, which we might think we're seeing in this kind of disavowal, that transcends sexual categories, I think what we see is the spectre of lesbianism being discredited. Like feminism, it still goes too far. So I begin with context. Building on persistent entrenched homophobia that Yuri was just talking about, Berlusconi's government and his media channels have promoted a form of sexualized heteronormativity. Lesbians, like other sexual dissidents, are for the most part invisibilized, demonized, discriminated against. As a result, many individuals who might wish to identify as lesbians refuse this term, refusing to be categorized as a deviant sexual other. In Irving Goffman's terms, this is a way of avoiding stigma by denying association with a discredited identity. Simultaneously, however, Berlusconismo rewards women who perform female homoeroticism for the male gaze. Young women seeking a media career or financial gain are encouraged to connote through their actions, I'm not a lesbian, but I'll perform erotic acts with women for male sexual gratification. However we wish to interpret this image, as sexual objectification or post-feminist sexual emancipation available to a queer gaze, it signifies within a broader heteronormative realm, which casts self-defining lesbians as unnatural, while greedily consuming female homoeroticism that seems to remain complicit with heteronormative patriarchy. Berlusconismo has established acceptable and unacceptable categories of female same-sex desire and practices, What we might call real lesbians are unacceptable in mainstream discourses, while this kind of what we might call fake lesbianism seems to be valorised. Now, one problem with seeing the situation in these terms is the potential reinforcing of essentialist sexual categories. On the one hand, there's the lesbian movement for real lesbians that seek to enable women who design women to develop positive, autonomous forms of lesbian subjectivity. The movement has fought to open up spaces, separating even from the movimento eterofeminista in the early 80s, in order to articulate uno specifico lesbico. The notion of what lesbian subjectivity might be has evolved in a productively rich and flexible ways in recent years, and a much greater variety of lesbian subject positions are visible. These developments have been captured and represented in the media by texts such as I viaggi di Nina that was on La Sette in 2006 by the journalist Giovanna Nina Palmieri, which is updated and expanded in her recent book Ragazze che amano ragazze. Further texts that represent positive affirmations of lesbian identity are Maria Laura Anniboli's two documentaries, L'altra metà del cielo e L'altra metà del cielo continua, from 2009 to 2012. However, as the previous discussion displays, these texts and attitudes are known to a minority of individuals, and politically engaged and proud lesbians in the public eye remain few and far between. On the other hand, we have women in the public eye, models, actors, escorts embroiled in scandal, who market themselves as heterosexual, but who engage in homoerotic activity either as part of their playful role or for a paying male audience. The term lesbian is very rarely used in relation to these women. They don't identify as lesbians, and while to some extent their behaviour fits the social-sexual category of lesbianism, they have been considered fake lesbians. They engage in same-sex acts just to gain attention, thereby reducing real female same-sex relationships and desire to a bit of fun just to turn on male voyeurs. The real desire of these fake lesbians is obviously for the men watching them. It doesn't disrupt the form of heteronormativity privileged by Berlusconismo, and therefore doesn't attract homophobic abuse, while many gay men and figures like Paola Concha do. These women are also often complicit with neoliberal patriarchy. Now, these polarised views of real and fake lesbians, which I don't necessarily agree with, I'm putting them out there to be provocative, I think they raise important issues of human rights and ethical citizenship, but they also risk reproducing the problematic, moralistic judgments that feminists have implicitly or explicitly directed at the Veline when they take up a position as real women, reducing the Veline to fakes. And I recommend, again, Danielle Hitkin's much-cited work on this issue. A perspective that contrasts real lesbians with fake lesbian performances risks imposing essentialist categories of sexual authenticity just when the notion of what lesbian subjectivity might be is finally becoming queerly fluid rather than exclusive, as we saw in the documentary. This type of categorization narrows rather than increases women's freedoms to develop an autonomous sexual identity. So having sketched a few of the tensions and problems inherent in the context, let's see some examples. And I'll start with the one that we've just looked at, and then go on to some others. So Sara Veronica and Il Sogno. On one level, this phenomenon represents a significant disruption of heteronormativity. It was a sort of coming out drama that unfolded exceptionally on live TV. It made visible the tip of an iceberg of a realtà sommersa, thousands of young and not so young women who are desperately craving or already living an alternative to heteronormative patriarchy. They want to enjoy and have their identities affirmed by a positive media presence. Only Sara and Veronica obviously didn't really come out. We see two women who seemed to want to be in a relationship, but who then obviously disassociated themselves from the label lesbian couple. Now they are no longer not a lesbian couple. In a recent interview, Sara spoke about her life today, the end of her relationship with Matteo Guerra, described as amore. She spoke about posing for Playboy, a brand that she professes to admire. She spoke about her former amicizia and ongoing amicizia with Veronica, which is characterized as a moment of excess they've now managed to overcome. This is a neat realignment with neoliberal patriarchy, which narrates a provocative dalliance with same-sex desire that is then obediently repressed. For many fans, Sara and Veronica's relationship seemed real, as opposed to other fake representations of female homoeroticism in the Italian media. But what was it exactly? Special friendship? Perhaps a postmodern version of the romantic friendship of the 19th century? Do these disavowals show that the label of lesbian remains as stigmatized as ever? Or do they reveal that it's too monolithic a term? Let's see another example. We have Francesca De André and Chiara Giorgiani, participants in the TV reality shows L'Isola dei Famosi and Grande Fratello. This image here appeared in Vanity Fair in April this year. Francesca and Chiara, in the article that follows, make some confused and confusing declarations. Are they or aren't they? Is this a relationship or a publicity stunt? Is their post-feminist sexuality feminist or neoliberal? What are we to make of the fact that they think gay men should be fathers since they might psychologically damage their children? By calling their relationship un'amicizia, are they necessarily demoting it? Or is this, again, a post-identity politics queering of female friendship? A literary example of disavowal is provided by the characters Anna and Francesca in Silvia Avallone's novel Acciaio from 2010. These 13-year-old girls, best friends, kiss and dance together, shower together, reproducing and elaborating forms of female homoeroticism that are commonly seen in mainstream pornography, but also on Italian television. They do this for their own fun, but also for the hidden voyeurs that spy on them from the apartment opposite, which I just know are both male and female. However, Anna then tells Francesca this has to stop. They are no longer young. Their intimacy is now breaching a social taboo, and it is something that they cannot live. Non è una cosa possibile da vivere, mi vergogno da morire, she says. We see Francesca battle with a desire to declare and live a same-sex relationship with Anna, and then slide into underage sex work. We see Anna, aged 13, involved with a man aged 23, angrily hurling the word lesbica at Francesca as an insult. But Anna then wonders, and that's the bottom quote, if, in different circumstances, for example if they lived in Milan and not Piombino, maybe she and Francesca would have been emboldened to live out their physical and emotional bond in a different way. Strikingly, a further level of lesbian disavowal surrounds this novel, authorial disavowal. While asserting that, of course, readers are free to interpret the novel in any way they wish, Avallone insists that this is not a novel about homosexuality, but the bond between the girls is really maternal. A final example is Stefano Pasetto's film Il Richiamo, that's just been released in Italy this year, which depicts a sexual relationship between two previously heterosexual women. The film is bleak. It's pervaded by homophobia. Female same-sex desire is associated with the cancer of one of the women. There is no glimpse of an affirming queer context anywhere, and the relationship is unsatisfied and doomed. One of them explicitly tells the other, "Noi non siamo fidanzate," before returning to her former boyfriend, getting pregnant and marrying him. The cancerous lesbian does recover happily and then questo, ready for a new life, but her story is not told. She recovers at the very end of the film, so it's an interruption in the narrative. We don't hear her story. It's eclipsed by the apparent narrative impossibility of lesbianism. Moreover, like Avallone, aside from the disavowals during the film, the actors who played the lead roles, Sandro Ceccarelli and Francesca Einaudi, also disavow their own apparent implicit lesbianism by association. In an interview, they both declare that yes, they've had sexual experiences or feelings for amiche, but these were not real. L'amore vero has always, of course, been with men. So what are we to make of these various forms of disavowal? One response to the media coverage of Francesca and Chiara, Sara and Veronica is that it doesn't matter if they're real lesbians or identify as such. They are perforating the heterosexual matrix. Their presence is filling a gaping homophobic media void, and obviously catalysing many young women and slightly older women to reflect on their sexuality, to socialise, and to gain courage from interacting with others who feel similarly, to take the first steps towards autonomous self-definition. But of course, this doesn't have to entail a permanent, monolithic lesbian identity. What matters is achieving the socio-cultural and discursive conditions in which women can define and determine their sexualities on their own terms. But what disappoints me is that stigma that still clings to a lesbian identity is all too palpable in these examples. Aside from some of the fans of Il Sogno who claim to go oltre gli stereotipi, many of these disavowals of lesbianism seem motivated not by decision to remain queerly fluid, to transcend sexual categories, but by fear of being associated with a minority perceived as abject. The entangled discourses of lesbian feminism and homophobia that bubble out of these declarations speak volumes about the pervasive, homophobic Italian context. We see an urgent need to associate with women who represent the possibility of lesbian desire, accompanied by disassociation from what this is perceived to entail. We see the displacement of real life into the realm of the sogno. We could read these situations as confirming women's right in a post-feminist world to choose male or female partners without feeling constrained or by outmoded and problematic stereotypes of sexual categorization. Post-lesbismo. But doesn't there have to be a more fully visible and articulated lesbismo before we get to the post phase? Rosa Braidotti, writing about female subjectivity in 1991, said, "One cannot deconstruct a subjectivity that one has never been fully granted." Does the example of insomnia indicate that post-lesbian subjectivity can pack a transformative punch even without the broader legitimization of lesbian subjectivity? Perhaps, but in my view this transformation remains very limited. This is certainly not the politicized, self-conscious, ironic post-lesbianism of figures such as Sandra Bernard. Moreover, what if Sara and Veronica or other women who experience temporary amicizie of this kind are no longer together or never were coupled in the first place because of homophobic social cultural pressure? Many women indeed still find it very difficult to live the life they desire today because of persistent homophobia, both internalized and in the broader social cultural context. This seems to me to be precisely what Avalone is narrating in her novel Acciaio. And this is one reason why her dismissal of a homosexual interpretation of Anna and Francesca's attraction seems so incredibly problematic to me. Avalone seems to assume in the statement a post-identity politics perspective on sexuality, sfuggendo alle etichette, but lesbian identity remains implicitly unspeakable, as though it needed to be diluted. The amicizia that she narrates is not to be considered as equal to an amore, just paragonabile. Just like civil unions and civil partnerships in Britain are paragonabile to marriage. Avalone, like Sandra Ciccarelli and Francesca Einaudi, is acknowledging an openness to non-normative sexuality, but simultaneously demoting lesbianism to a form of friendship and ensuring that the stigma of lesbianism, most importantly, doesn't stick to her as the author. So to conclude, these forms of disavowal leave me with many questions and frustrations. Why, when for a growing minority of women, lesbian identity is a source of great liberation and affirmation, are there so many texts, and there are more, that insist on the impossibility of lesbianism, or which evoke it just to discredit it? What is it about the movimento lesbico that discourages many women who desire women from joining it, so a disassociation from the political past? Valeria Santini, speaking in Diversamente Etero, as we've just seen, notes, se questa, which is speaking about Sara and Veronica, se questa rappresentazione del lesbismo ci è insufficiente o non ci piace, ci dobbiamo interrogare noi. Of course we should interrogate ourselves. But we should also interrogate a social cultural context that disproportionately rewards heterosexuality and that greedily consumes female homoeroticism, as long as it is merely a transitory, audience-focused performance that will be dissolved into Playboy iconography long before anything like specifico lesbico or post-lesbico becomes visible, speakable, or livable for the broader population. And just to clarify, I'm certainly not arguing that erotic representations of same-sex intimacy should be censored, such as the ones that we saw earlier. But what is currently on offer needs to be supplemented, as we've been saying, by a more visible, broader range of representations, some of which are overtly targeted at female desiring subjects. But I absolutely believe that the female homoeroticism that is enacted on TV between Berline, which seems to be overtly aimed at heterosexual men, is also accessible to a lesbian gaze and to a queer gaze. To my mind, the choices made by the women I've just discussed, such as the choice to use the term amicizia, are not entirely free. And the pressures of neoliberal patriarchy are very present in these narratives of apparent sexual emancipation. The implication that for the neoliberal self-regulating subject, sexuality is a choice, is also problematic. This means that moments of contestation and queer opposition are all the more vital and necessary. But perhaps these moments won't gain momentum until there is a significant number of lesbian-identified women in the Italian public eye who are prepared to say openly, sono lesbica e orgogliosa di esserlo. If the stigma of lesbianism began to dissolve, A whole range of more fluid sexual subjectivities for women might also gain greater sociocultural speakability and livability. It's not that this non-couple of Anike is wrong. Perhaps they are a new form of lesbian diva. That might be something to talk about. But in order for there to be any substantive choice in sexual self-realization, this type of non-lesbianism needs to be supplemented by many more representations of explicitly affirming female same-sex